How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? This is Aaron Burr, and you're listening to the Aaron Burr broadcast on the Free Thought Doctrine. All right, it's been a little while since I've talked to you guys, and there's been quite a bit of news that's come out. So I plan on hitting a lot of topics, talking about a lot of articles, not dwelling too far or too deep into any one story, but more not necessarily rapid fire, but hitting each topic and giving brief opinions and analysis about each subject. So, first thing I want to say is today is January 17th, 2021, at the time of this recording. And this morning, unfortunately, we got the news that Rush Limbaugh passed away. So I want to start off the show saying, rest in peace, Rush. There would be no alternative media or any kind of conservative media at all without Rush, who was the pioneer. So again, rest in peace, Rush. It's actually been kind of a sad day since I found this out. So moving on to the first story, you guys have, I'm sure, obviously noticed how DC has been under a military lockdown since mid-January. And if you guys were unfortunate enough to watch the inauguration, which I only watched parts of it, but how eerie and creepy it looked, especially those images of the caravan, the presidential caravan driving down the street, and you see all those National Guardsmen all standing out there on the side of the road, you know, watching the president go by, and how foreign that looked, like it was something out of North Korea, with all the troops in their, in their camis and their uniforms, and then like the president rolling by, and the rest of DC is completely empty. What kind of starting of an administration, like the look and the feel and the vibe, something very, at least had the feeling of an un-American feeling. And the latest news on that is, I heard they're going to be there through spring, but here's a story from The Hill. Let's see, the story came out today, I believe. Yeah, today. And it says thousands of National Guard troops will remain in Washington, D.C. in early March amid concerns over followers of the far-right QAnon conspiracy theory, some of whom hold out hope former President Trump will be returned to the office March 4th. Quote, some of these people have figured out that apparently 75 years ago, the president used to be inaugurated on March 4th. Okay, now, why that's relevant, God knows. At any rate, now they are thinking maybe we should gather again and storm the Capitol on March 4th. That is circulating online. House Armed Services Committee Chairman Adam Smith, a Democrat out of Washington, said during a Wednesday hearing, according to CNN. Smith added that there would not necessarily be specific unrest on March 4th, but there were concerns around the date. So basically, you have security theater going down hardcore in the nation's capital, and now they are using this quote-unquote QAnon conspiracy to keep the troops there. Like that conspiracy actually has that huge of a following of these quote-unquote extremists and these quote-unquote terrorists, because of course they've painted that brush onto every Trump supporter and every conservative out there, and even libertarians into this category, when in reality that's such a small percentage of that overall 74 million people, right? The fact of the matter is that this QAnon BS, right? And I'm calling it BS because, in my opinion, that has been a government psyop from the very beginning, so that they can now use that psyop for these kind of reasons, right? So they create this conspiracy out of elements of truth, out of factoids, right? And the government is complicit in this, right? Like, elements of certain agencies release little tidbits of information that catch a slice of the population that the media then uses to use those people to smear every single person that they disagree with into that category. Like, they pigeonhole everybody into that category. So now, if you're on the right at all, you are now labeled a far-right QAnon conspiracy theorist. And then they use those reasons to justify certain things, like keeping troops in D.C. and locking the entire Capitol down, and then passing more legislation or more policies like Patriot Act 2.0, and use the whole QAnon thing to, justify more centralization and more power to the government, to the overall federal government. So that's what this whole QAnon thing is here. And you see it here in real time, where this congressman is literally saying, because of the quote-unquote far-right QAnon conspiracy, we have to keep the Capitol under military lockdown, right? And they try to use the January 6th quote-unquote riot to justify all this, when we all know that in reality, that was such a small percentage of all the people out there. And there's probably only handfuls of people that were quote-unquote QAnon people. And the most of them, as you see plenty of footage, the police just let people in anyways. And then you had some of the quote-unquote QAnon conspiracy theorists, like celebrities, were there, who in reality to the overall conservative movement are nothing but a joke. And there were a lot of people that did believe certain aspects of the QAnon conspiracy, but the fact that none of the things that they said that were going to happen happened completely discredits that. And anybody who actually believes in that, I'll just say, I feel sorry for you. But in reality, you guys are the minority. However, you are being used as useful idiots, like Lenin used to say, to smear everybody on the right and justify all these unconstitutional, overbearing government means. So, moving on to the next story. In one of my previous episodes, I was railing against these governors who were shoving COVID-19 positive people, elderly people, into nursing homes. Like, they would literally go to the hospital, get diagnosed with a positive COVID-19 case, and then they would scurry them back and force them into the nursing homes. And some people were like, well, why would they do that? Because it was all politics, right? They didn't want to be the state that was overrun with their hospitals, and they wanted to gloat and brag about, look at my hospitals, they aren't full, because they're just shoving all these people into the nursing homes, when we all knew from the very beginning, one of the very first things we learned, especially from what was going on in Italy, was the fact that this virus attacked the elderly and killed the elderly at way higher proportions than any other demographic. Yet they were shoving positive, people with COVID-19 into these nursing homes, right? And it was a lot of the big blue states, right? California with Newsom, Michigan with Whitmer, which she did it even worse, and I talked about that before in my last episode where I talked about this, where she forced young people into nursing homes, spreading it there. Murphy out of New Jersey, and then, of course, Cuomo, right, who's been hailed as hero for, taking all these actions that were seen as, great things. Like he did all these great measures that saved so many lives in New York, even though New York led or maybe even still leads the country in COVID deaths overall. But then he's caught with his pants down, right, here recently. Now, granted, like I said, we all knew this for months from the very beginning, and the rest of the media is just starting to catch on. And Mainly it's because recently there was a whistleblower, and by whistleblower I mean there was someone who, in the Cuomo staff member. Here's a story from ABC News, right? This is from a couple days ago, and the story starts off saying that, well, here's a headline: New York Governor Andrew Cuomo under investigation for nursing home deaths. And then the little subtitle: Cuomo was praised for efforts early in the pandemic, but now faces criticism. You think? So this is actually a story from the 17th, or today, right? 17th. And story from, I said, the ABC News, and it's saying FBI and federal prosecutors in Brooklyn are investigating Governor Andrew Cuomo's coronavirus task force with a particular focus on his administration's handling of nursing homes early in the coronavirus pandemic. The investigation, first reported by the Albany Times-Union, is in its initial stages. Subpoenas have been issued. The full scope of the investigation is not immediately clear, but the sources said there was a particular interest in nursing homes. Last week, an aide conceded that administration withheld the nursing home death toll from state lawmakers out of fear it would be used against the state by the Trump administration. Wow. So basically they hid the numbers because they were afraid if they told the truth that the Trump administration at the time would investigate them. Wow. So the story goes on. He starts tweeting that we killed everyone in nursing homes, Cuomo's top aide, Melissa DeRosa, said of Trump on the conference call recording on a transcript, which was reported to ABC News. He starts going after Governor Murphy, starts going after Governor Newsom, starts going after Governor Whitmer. He directs the Department of Justice to do an investigation to us. And basically we froze because then we were in a position where we weren't sure if what numbers we were going to give the Department of Justice or what we would give to you guys was going to be used against us, DeRosa told the legislators. So I guess they had like a conference call, and there's a transcript from this conference call that was leaked. We weren't sure if there was going to be an investigation. Cuomo conceded this week his handling of nursing home facility data created a, quote, void that became filled by misinformation and conspiracy theories, but he declined to apologize. Of course he would say that. Of course. He's trying to cover his tracks. He's trying to smear and discredit what people are saying about him, about the truth. There's this other story I have here, because I want to find numbers. Story from ProPublica, which is a liberal source, right? And the headline is, Cuomo still underreporting the total count of COVID nursing home deaths. This was from a week ago. The governor finally released data on nursing homes cases after lawsuits and demands from lawmakers. But hundreds of presumed COVID-19 deaths have yet to be included in the state's official total. So the story goes on. Hundreds of COVID-19 deaths among New York State's nursing home residents still have not been formally acknowledged by the administration. When the administration last month announced totals of those nursing home residents who had died in hospitals, the number of overall deaths swelled by 50%, from some 8,000 to more than 12,000. Today, as the virus continues to ravage New York, slightly more than 15,000 residents of nursing homes and other adult care facilities have died of COVID-19, more than in any other state. Roughly 13,000 of those were nursing home residents, close to 13% of the state's nursing home population. The true toll of nursing home deaths has been a controversy for the administration from the outset of the pandemic. For more than 6 months, it has been criticized for failing to publicly count the deaths that occurred in hospitals. Wow, so even hospitals. The administration's policy allowing patients who had tested possible to be sent from hospitals and nursing homes, what I was just talking about, already struggling to prevent the spread of disease, provoked outrage, as it should. The state's largest union for nurses sued the health department for policies that said endangered frontline healthcare workers. So, I mean, it goes on a little bit more, but exactly what I was talking about a few episodes ago, where they knowingly put positive COVID-19 elderly patients into nursing homes that did not have the adequate means to properly quarantine them or separate them or have any kind of process, because this was all brand new at the time, right? And these places aren't really set up for this kind of deal. I mean, let's just think about it for, say, 2 seconds here. Do you guys recall a hospital ship being sent to New York, where at the time they're like, oh, okay, well, this is not for COVID-19 positive patients, it's for other people, from other ailments or whatever. Okay, then you could have taken those people out of the hospitals, put them on the ship, and you could have left the elderly people in the hospitals. Or, and I think they ended up putting COVID people in those ships, put them on the ships. The point is, there could have been a means. They could have worked out a situation where they could have definitely saved lives. Because again, none of this was a secret. We all knew from the very beginning that the elderly were at risk. So I would love to see indictments. Probably won't go that far because of who's in charge, but maybe it's more of a fantasy. But I'm glad at least there's some kind of traction. Granted, it's 6, 7, 8, 9 months late, but there's at least something. There's at least some sort of investigation going on by the feds. Not that I have that much faith in the feds, but at least there's something going on that at the minimum will highlight the story. So moving on, maybe you guys remember at the beginning of the pandemic, or at least shortly after, meat prices started to skyrocket, if we recall, right? Because basically the shipping, or the supply chains, I should say, were being disrupted because you couldn't bring in as many people into all the different farms and food factories and all that stuff. So it slowed down the situation, to get food. A lot of it was grain. You couldn't get grain to the animals to eat. So the meat prices started skyrocketing, and there was at many grocery stores there was rationing, or at least limits on what you could buy, or how much beef or whatever you could buy. And I've talked about inflation before, how we've dumped so much money into the supply, like the money supply. They've printed so much money, which really is on a keyboard, right? So hyperinflation, or at least skyrocketing inflation is on the way. And what happens, what is a huge signifier that this is going to happen is, well, first of all, the rich, the people that can't afford, could absorb inflation. They start investing in things that only people in that rich ruling class can afford in the first place. So they dump their money into land and property. They dump their money into gold. They buy Bitcoin. You've seen how that's skyrocketed, right? They buy these things that they're essentially sinking their cash into physical things for the most part. Because what happens is when everything skyrockets, they'll have all their means in place, right? They'll be taken care of. They'll have their property and everything that if they needed to sell off or whatever, they would have the means to do it, while the rest of us are just screwed, right? And they're not going to have trouble buying food when the food prices skyrocket. And as a side note, is it not a red flag that Bill Gates owns the most farmland out of any human being in America? I think North America, but at least America. Is that not a red flag that he has recently purchased so much farmland that he is the number one owner of farmland in America. Is that not frightening? Then I read the story, came out 2-3 days ago, from Bloomberg. Headline, the world will pay more for meat as food inflation deepens. So reading the article here, there are signs that food inflation that's gripped the world over the past year, raising prices of everything from shredded cheese to peanut butter, is about to get worse. The COVID-19 pandemic upended food supply chains, paralyzing shipping, sickening workers that keep the world fed, and ultimately raising consumer grocery costs around the globe last year. Now, farmers, especially ones raising cattle, hogs, and poultry, are getting squeezed by the highest corn and soybean prices in 7 years. It's lifted the cost of feeding their herds by 30% or more. To stay profitable, producers, including Tyson Foods Inc., are increasing prices, which will ripple through supply chains and show up in the coming months as higher price tags for beef, pork, and chicken around the world. Here, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization said global meat prices in January climbed for the fourth straight month. Since December 1st, corn futures in Chicago have risen 29% and soybeans 19%. And remember, it's corn and soy, that's what's feeding all the animals. We definitely expect profit margins to be squeezed, and then producers will have to somehow start thinking about how they're going to cover that price. Meat prices at retail grocery stores rise the most after farmers shrink their herds due to declining profits. That's a process that takes time, which means there's a lag between the feed cost inflation and rising consumer prices. In the U.S., livestock and poultry operations have already started contraction due to slim profits amid the pandemic. So the American hog herd fell in December by 0.9%. Cattle fell in January by 0.2%. Cattle profits are down in Oklahoma. So this is just talking right about the fact that corn and soybean and basically the feed that we use to feed the animals is shooting up in price, so that now the farmers can only buy so much of it, so they have to shrink their herds, and that skyrockets the price of meat, and it just reverberates to the whole economy, the whole food economy. And this is not even talking about the financial, like inflation, right? So just wait until that expounds the whole situation. I'm not saying you should be worried. I'm saying you better be worried, and you better be prepared. All right, moving on. So here's another story. It's talking about the Bank of America. This story is a few weeks old now, but I really wanted to bring it up because just the implication of the story. Now, I've mentioned this kind of thing in a few of the last episodes where I was talking about how if you happen to have a certain world viewpoint that doesn't align with the mainstream, how now, I'm kind of tying it back to what I was saying earlier with the whole QAnon conspiracy, and they've used that to paint everybody on the right, conservatives, libertarians, Trump supporters, as you're all extremists, right? You're all domestic terrorists, right? So, going along that theme, there's a story from the New York Post, again from, I think it's the 6th, and the headline, Security Experts Blast Bank of America for Helping Feds in Capitol Riot Probe. So, security experts, including the NYPD's former top cop, ripped Bank of America for reportedly handing over customer data to the feds probing the Capitol riots, warning Saturday of a fishing expedition that was chilling in its overreach. The bank handed over financial data of its clients who happened to use credit and debit cards for lodging, food, and other purchases in Washington in the days before and after January 6th. So Tucker Carlson was talking about this. That's not just a good reason to hand over private information. If that's the way they do business now, then people of this country really have something to worry about, said Bernard Carrick, a security consultant. I think he was the in charge of the NYPD at some point. I don't think I'm saying his name right, but I remember this name. Because he said during his time with the NYPD, the department did seek information about suspects from financial institutions, and particularly particular during terror probes. The distinction he noted was that the department always had a specific suspect in mind when it sought the data. He tweeted, "Move over Russia, China, and Venezuela." Exactly. "I'm sure there were people who had nothing to do with Capitol riots and were profiled as well just because they went to the ATM in Washington," he told the Post. Only one person among the 211 who had their information snooped had been interviewed by the feds, and none had been arrested. This is outrageous. This is absolutely outrageous. So basically what happened is Bank of America is just looking at who made or who pulled money from their ATMs or used their credit cards or their debit cards or whatever in Washington around that date range, just did a blanket uniform, pool of information and supplied it to the feds. It's not like there was a warrant where the police came and said, "Hey, we have this warrant for this individual or that individual. Could you please pull up their financial data?" No. They volunteered information from just a uniform swath of people. That's complete and total BS. Complete and total BS. Have you guys not heard of what's going on in China? Because this is on that path to China. And remember, China's run by the Communist Chinese Party, right? And in China, they have this thing called the social credit system. And the social credit system, they're trying to make it an overall national system. And it might even be by now. Because I'm reading a story from Wired, and this is back in 2019. So this is a couple years ago. A couple years ago, it wasn't the entire country, but it was huge swaths of the country. It was basically local jurisdictions in cahoots with giant corporations, where they basically track all your purchases, right? And they track everything you say or do on social media and at work, right, in your place of employment. And if you do anything against the government, or say anything, or say you get a jaywalking ticket and you don't pay that, or whatever, they will, again, in cahoots with all these companies, will deny you all kinds of services. You can't, whether it be an Uber, whether it be making purchases online, shopping at certain stores or restaurants, they could affect your financial situation, your credit score, right? You might not be able to take out loans or anything because everything's going to be connected. The government and these businesses will supply each other with information. And it's not a nationally coordinated system yet, but it's on its way there. And maybe actually it is, because again, I'm pulling this from a 2019 article from Wired. It's called "The Complicated Truth About China's Social Credit System." This was written June 7th, 2019. China's social credit system has been compared to Black Mirror, Big Brother, and every other dystopian future sci-fi writers can think up. The reality is more complicated and in some ways worse. The idea for social credit came about back in 2007 with the projects announced by the government as an opt-in system in 2014. But there's a difference between the official government system and private corporate versions, though the latter's scoring system that includes shopping habits and friendships is often conflated with the former. See, that's what I mean. So these private companies and these government jurisdictions are colluding with each other. So I'm kind of skipping around a little bit in the story because it's a very long story. China's social credit system expands the idea to all aspects of life, judging citizens' behavior and trustworthiness. Caught jaywalking? Don't pay a court bill? Play your music too loud on the train? You could lose certain rights, such as booking a flight or a train ticket. Unveiled in a 2014 plan, pieces of the system are already in place, and the Chinese government appears to be targeting a 2020 goal. So this is what I'm saying. Who knows how much of it's in play. Local governments have their own social record systems that work differently, while unofficial private versions are operated at companies such as Ant Financial's Zima Credit and Alibaba, which that's like the Chinese Amazon. I've known people to buy stuff off from there. System use shopping habits among other data to inform credit style scores on an opt-in basis. Sure, for now. To be a bit more confusing, the data collected by private companies is expected to be hoovered up by the government in the future, and some of the data is already used in government trials. Of course. Oh, it's only with you, quote unquote, users' consent. Sure. What's troubling is when those private systems link up to the government's rankings, which is already happening. That's a lot of data being collected with little protection and no transparency about how it's analyzed to spit out a score or ranking. How does it work? The target eventually is that the government system will be countrywide, with businesses given a unified social credit code and citizens an identity number, all linked to a permanent record. Some reports talk about a blacklist. Sounds similar to something going on over here. That's part of the official government social credit system, which means if you owe the government money, for example, you could lose certain rights. There's a difference between getting a low social credit score and being blacklisted by the government, such as for refusing to pay a fine. The criteria that go into social credit ranking depends on where you are. It's according to which place you're in because they have their own catalogs. Like I said, right now it's a lot of different local jurisdictions. One city, Rongcheng, gives all residents 1,000 points to start. Authorities make deductions for bad behaviors like traffic violations and points for good behavior such as donating to charity. Private projects such as Sesame Credit hoover up all sorts of data on its 400 million customers, from how much time they spend playing video games, which is considered bad, to whether they are a parent, which is considered good. That can be shared with other companies. One infamous example is Sesame Credit linking up with the Bay dating site, so would-be partners can judge each other on their looks as well as their social credit score. Well, it even says, so far, taking part in both the public and government versions is technically voluntary. In the future, the official social credit system will be mandatory. That said, there's plenty of pressures to take part now, kind of like the vaccine. There are incentives for participating and disincentives for not participating, very much like the vaccine. What happens if you're blacklisted? Liu Hu is a journalist in China writing about censorship and government corruption. Because of his work, Liu has been arrested and fined and blacklisted. Liu found he was named on a list of dishonest persons subject to enforcement by the Supreme People's Court, as not qualified to buy a plane ticket and banned from traveling some train lines, banned from buying property, and banned from taking out a loan. See exactly what I'm talking about right here. Exactly what I'm talking about. And then I'll link this up with a Bank of America story where they're already, snitching people out to the feds, and to those other stories I was talking about where they were denying people banking accounts and denying people, getting on airplanes, no fly lists, and see how all this is starting to slowly come together. The story goes on. There was no file, no police warrant, no official advance notification. They just cut me off from the things I was once entitled to, he told the Globe and Mail. What's really scary is there is nothing you can do about it. You can report to no one. You're stuck in the middle of nowhere. And you could say, well, what about your due process rights? Well, if they're private companies, then you don't have any due process rights, right? In China, there's no such thing as a rule of law. Regulations that can be largely apolitical on the surface can be political when the Communist Party of China decides to use them for political purposes. Once you're in a low category, it makes it difficult. Huge potential for negative spiral. Such a system could further divide society, creating classes of people depending on their social credit. And this is where comparisons to Black Mirror pop up. Exactly. There's literally a Black Mirror episode that's very similar to this, which makes this the most creepiest thing I've read in a while. But the system can also be used to enforce vague laws like endangering national security or unity. Sounds kind of similar to situations going on over here. Let's put DC troops in DC. For businesses, a social credit system could also be used for micro enterprises, which couldn't be assessed traditional criteria. Hoffman isn't buying that argument, saying such a system is about government power. Absolutely. If solving problems was a real goal, the CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party, would not need social credit to do it. She says China's social credit system is a state-driven program designed to do one thing: to uphold and expand the Chinese Communist Party's power. I could go on, and the story goes on and on and on. So look at the themes here. So this is what I'm talking about is not something out of a novel. This is stuff that's literally going on in China as I speak. as you listen, this system, the social credit system, is in play right now. And then you look at what's going on in this country, where essentially one half of the country is being smeared as domestic terrorists, white supremacists, and extremists, being smeared with the QAnon conspiracy folks, being smeared, right? Being grouped into the people that stormed the Capitol, right? So you have that going on, and then the stories of, people losing their bank accounts, being put on no-fly lists. Combine that with the vaccine passports, and you'll be, the vaccine won't be mandated, but you won't be able to participate in society whatsoever, or you'll be treated as a second-class citizen if you don't get the vaccine. So you combine that with this, and I'm saying, you have all the censorship on social media and people being banned that are only on one side of the equation in terms of viewpoints. You got Patriot Act 2.0 coming. You got, the former war criminal John Brennan of the CIA saying that, even libertarians are domestic terrorists. You have people going on MSNBC saying that they should use drone strikes and the tactics used in Afghanistan and the Middle East to come after quote-unquote extremists. You have all the troops in D.C. They're there to protect the Capitol from quote-unquote extremists. You got the Bank of America turning over 211 names over to the feds because they're quote-unquote extremists, even though they only interviewed one person and they had no warrants at all. Has anybody ever studied or looked at Snowden, or just merely watched the movie, and you see how they had blanket uniform authority to look into every single person's personal emails, phone calls, websites, personal chats, DMs, you name it, and you mix all that in the pot, and social credit system is coming to a town near you. That's a fact. I don't think that's opinion. I think that's a fact. It's coming. It is coming. And then look at this other little lovely story I have. Have you guys heard of HR 127? That's the gun control bill that Biden has conjured up that they want to push through the Congress. And it's basically every single extreme measure that one side's pushed and the other side's feared on a piece of paper about to be rammed through Congress. At least they're going to try. So everything I just said, and then you add in this tidbit, and, maybe it might not pass. It's always been, gun bills have always failed, at least on this anything of this size. But keep in mind, we have one party rule. The uniparty is in charge. And here's a story from one of the websites, one of the gun websites, concealedcarry.com, where they took the highlights out of it. I mean, you could read the whole bill if you want, but this kind of just pulls out some of the highlights. And if you recall, I had another episode where I railed against the lovely ATF. Those fine men and women who work for the ATF. Just great human beings. Just America's best. And while this bill makes a system for licensing the possession of guns and ammunition so that we can register each gun with the lovely, awesome ATF. They want each gun owner to give the ATF the following information: every make, model, serial number, owner's identity, date acquired, where it's stored, and identity of anyone who it's loaned to. They want this within 3 months after the bill is passed, and then after the bill passes for every gun you buy. And it's going to set up a wonderful system of a huge national database which is in the bill. And it'll be accessible to the public, to all federal, state, and local law enforcement, and all branches of the military, and all state and local governments. Oh, that's lovely. And the Attorney General will issue a gun owner license to possess a gun and ammo. Of course, the licensee will have to be 21 years of age, so you could go to war at 18 and die for your country, but if you want to get a gun license, you'll have to be 21, which will require a criminal background check, a psychological eval, completing a training course at least 24 hours long, and be insured. Your license will be denied or revoked if you're found to be psychologically unfit for any number of reasons. License suspension. After granting your gun license, you may be suspended if you don't follow any of the rules. If you don't have firearm insurance, the AG has a right to suspend your gun license. I'm sure that the firearm insurance will be cheap. And if your license is suspended, you have to return and surrender all guns and ammo. Wow. License renewal. In order to renew your license, you must continue to jump through the hoops. The AG will renew a license if requested by a certain period of time, and as long as you've gone through at least 8 hours of training. The insurance, and in this article they're saying it really doesn't make any sense. And insurance will cost $800. And the article's not sure if that's per gun or overall. $800. Of course, quote-unquote military-style weapons, so AKA anything that looks scary, they're going to ban it. Of course, the bill goes further into depth on all guns that they think are military-style and has all the usual suspects on it. It also does a good job of making sure many of the loopholes are also covered, those damn loopholes, like how adding certain accessories magically turn your firearm into a military death ray machine gun thingamabob. So basically, they're trying to do another quote-unquote assault weapons ban. And if you think all of this is BS, you can serve between 1 and 40 years in prison and have a $150,000 fine. They're also going to ban 50 caliber rounds. And of course, quote-unquote large capacity magazines, which really is anything over 10, which is actually the standard. So in this article, it says this bill is a train wreck meant to do one thing: dismantle your Second Amendment rights. However bold this is, I believe it to be too radical for them to pass all this stuff at once, even for some of the other anti-gun politicians. Don't get me wrong, they'll be doing something, but I'm sure this is it. But I'm not sure this is it. I hope not, because nothing good can come of it. At the end of the day, this shows us the direction they move in and what the ultimate goal is. They're basically saying you need to do this, this, and this, and this, and if you don't, you'll get thrown in jail and lose your rights. They will take your guns from you, and I've always said that's the final goal. Facts. So basically, they probably won't be able to pass this all in one big bill, but their aim has always been incrementalism, right? They do a little bit at a time. And I won't be surprised if we get a series of bills if they try to pass some of the more less crazy sounding ones, even though they're all crazy sounding. Because even the whole gun license thing, the criminal background check, psych eval, I've heard people, even gun people, say, I think everybody should be trained. And I agree. I agree that people should be trained up. I always advocate that when you have a firearm to train. But just because whether you choose to train or not, I mean, that will be in your most benefit, self-interest for yourself. But even for people that don't, the right to bear arms is the right to bear arms. Shall not be infringed. Everything on here is an infringement. Everything. But then you have the Heller decision from the Supreme Court in 2010, and the McDonald decision. Will Heller, first of all, guarantee that the Second Amendment, or at least that, the right to bear arms is an individual right with no connection to a militia. So that's case law that's in play right now. And then McDonald incorporated the 14th Amendment, which guarantees basically all your rights in the Bill of Rights to everybody in all the states. And they included the Second Amendment as part of that. So this entire bill goes against the original Constitution, even if you try to use the collective militia original intent argument, it goes against that. It goes against the Heller decision, which absolutely guarantees a right to bear arms for an individual, including for self-defense in the home, and the McDonald decision, which guarantees that the Second Amendment is protection of your of your right to have firearms in each state. And then, of course, what I like to argue is the fact that at the end of the day, I could even care less about what the Second Amendment says or doesn't say, because the inherent God-given natural human right of self-preservation, the right to defend yourself, that's a human inalienable right. For example, if you took two dogs and they were fighting each other, you can't just make one dog sit there and allow the other dog to rip its throat out. Each life form has a right to defend itself. It's the same kind of thing. So either way, HR 127, yeah. Talk about radical. I mean, we all knew this was coming. It's no surprise. No surprise at all. All right. Where else do I want to go here? So many stories. I don't know if I should skip over some of these. How about this one? This was, what, a week or two ago? I mean, it feels like an eternity. How about the acquittal of Trump in the Senate? He was impeached in the House, completely partisan, of course, for the very most part. And then he had a trial in the Senate, which really was just a Stalinist show trial. I mean, the whole thing was a joke, and the whole thing was just an attack on half the country, right? They call for unity, but then they just drive division and just shove division down our throats. And I have two opinions on this. One is what I just stated. It's just a show trial. It was just a show trial. We all knew that he was going to get acquitted. They did not have enough votes to remove him. And first of all, the whole process was a joke, was a huge clown show anyways, because you can't impeach and remove someone who's not in office. I mean, to me, that's common sense. Chief Justice Roberts, so in the Constitution that they all claim to support or defend, says that to have a trial in the Senate for conviction of impeachment to remove a president, that they have to be there presently, and he wasn't there because he knew that it was a joke, and he's been a turncoat forever, and he wasn't there. So it was just a huge show trial like they had in Stalinist Russia, right? It was just a huge middle finger to Trump supporters, to conservatives, to half of America. And so that's opinion number one. My first go-to opinion here is a huge, completely unconstitutional clown show, Stalinist show trial. Opinion number two is they are doing on purpose just to piss us off. And by they, I don't even necessarily mean the Dems, but I mean the elite ruling class. The elite ruling class was throwing on this puppet show for us to rile up, to cause more division. It's classic divide and conquer. Rile up more division so that one half starts pointing and hating on the other side, and everybody just pointing fingers back and forth and just driving, like, as much as it will. I mean, first of all, and here's another side note, is the evidence that was used by the Democrats was, for the most part, completely fabricated. They took certain tweets, changed dates, superimposed them, with like video images and pictures and stuff that did not go together, that were not said in that kind of sequence. And it was, that alone should be completely illegal, and definitely would not work in a court of law, right? And then when Trump's lawyers came back at the end, they showed a lot of the hypocrisy, right? A lot of the hypocrisy of all the Democrats essentially doing the same, if not worse. A lot of it worse. But at the end of the day, it was just this huge trial that riled up emotions and anger on each side just because of how ridiculous it is. That's all on purpose. The global elite, the ruling class, they're throwing on this stupid show to get us all riled up and hating on each other so they could go ahead and screw us over while we're staring at each other instead of staring at them. Rather than directing our anger at them, the political establishment, the elites, the ultra rich elite, the giant, massive transnational corporations, the deep state, all these guys, they're just sitting there laughing at us over this stupid, ridiculous Stalinist show trial. So, I mean, it goes both ways. Yes, it pisses me off, but it was meant to piss me off, as it was meant to piss any of you off. And you just have to learn to take a step back and realize how much of a joke this all is as they screw us over behind our backs. Because that's what they do. And with that being said, I do want to mention that 7 Republicans, joined the Democrats in voting to convict Trump, which, I'm sorry, no matter what, even if you hate Trump, even if you despise the guy, it's 100% blatantly obvious to anybody being even remotely objective that he did not cause the damn riot. I mean, get the hell out of here. There's no way. Like I've said before, he was still doing a speech, and like 20 minutes before he ended the speech, it was already happening. So how did he incite it? Now they might say, well, because he's pushing a quote unquote, election voter conspiracy. And I'll say he didn't help his cause by continually to bring that issue up without definitive evidence. Not saying there isn't any definitive evidence out there, but just the general complaint. I don't know. It didn't help his case. And I've already said this. I know that a lot of people disagree with me on this. I know quite a few people that believe he won by a landslide. Maybe, but I still don't maintain that position. My position is it was really close because this country is extremely divided. And so all they needed to do, if there was any kind of fraud, they only needed just enough in these key battleground precincts to pull it off. And when you look at these certain places where he only won by, or Biden only won by like 14,000, 30,000, whatever, 150, whatever it was. I mean, it wasn't like those were landslides in those precincts that took the whole state with them. And to me, it seems more realistic that if there was fraud, it was done in these targeted precincts, and it wasn't that Trump won by millions and millions of votes. I don't think that's true. I'm not saying it isn't, but I just don't see that as being the truth. To me, this country is extremely divided, and there were just that many more. Or I would say it brought it a neck and neck, where if there was fraud, it was just enough to pull it over in all these exact locations, and then he took it. So I don't think it really helps his case. I know that a lot of the cases were thrown out in court. And so the evidence was never actually displayed to a court of law. But going back, those 7 Republicans, though. All right, here we go. 7 GOP senators voted to convict Trump. Only 1 faces voters next year. This is from NPR. A majority of senators voted Saturday to convict former President Trump on impeachment charge of inciting insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. But the Democrat side needed 17 Republicans to join them in order to reach the 2/3 threshold needed to convict. 7 GOP senators voted with Democrats, the most bipartisan impeachment vote in U.S. history, but well short of the 17 needed to convict. Of those 7 Republicans, 2 are retiring and only one, oh gosh, I've always hated this person, Lisa Murkowski, faces her state's voters in the next election cycle, 2022. I've always wanted to go to Alaska. That place fascinates me, but I don't understand why they vote this person in every single time she's up. Makes no sense to me. If you want a Democrat, then vote in a Democrat, but they vote in a complete and total rhino. Here's a closer look at the 7 GOP senators who broke ranks with their party and some of the political calculations they face back home. Let's see. Richard Burr of North Carolina, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins of Maine. Another one I don't understand. Why does Maine continually vote in this rhino? If you guys want a Dem, then vote in for a Dem. And the biggest joke of them all, Mitt Romney. Can't stand this guy. The guy is a walking, talking embarrassment. Ben Sass, no surprise. Pat Toomey, no surprise at all. Just a bunch of rhinos. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I didn't go through the story close enough to see which of the 2 are retiring or not and which one was facing. But all I know, and I know Trump came out recently saying that he was going to support, he was going to try to primary these people out, if I understand correctly. I mean, these guys do realize, right, that when it came to that, well, first of all, they're all Republicans, and more Republicans voted for Trump than ever before, period, win or lose. And that carried a bunch of House seats, and surely it only benefited the Senate because they almost took the House. In fact, that reminds me, because there's another story where, and this I believe was today, where Trump came out today in response to Mitch McConnell, who, since the day I ever even discovered this person, which was probably 15 years ago, I immediately looked at the guy, heard the guy speak, and it was just the first thought that came to my mind was totally corrupt and literally a swamp creature of the deep state. That's what he is. So apparently he came out and McConnell made some disparaging comments about Trump. I believe it was on the Senate floor, if I remember correctly. And so Trump released a statement. And it was, he's been laying low. He's not on Twitter anymore, obviously, so I'll go over some of it. So it starts off, the Republican Party can never again be respected or strong with political leaders, in quotes, like Senator Mitch McConnell at its helm. I totally agree with that. McConnell's dedication to business as usual, status quo policies, together with his lack of political insight, wisdom, skill, and personality, has rapidly driven him from majority leader to minority leader, and will only get worse. Agree with that. The Democrats and Chuck Schumer play McConnell like a fiddle. They've never had it so good, and they want to keep it that way. We know our America First agenda is a winner, not McConnell's Beltway First agenda or Biden's America Last. Very classic Trump here. In 2020, I received the most votes of any sitting president in history, almost 75 million. Every incumbent House Republican won for the first time in decades, and we flipped 15 seats, almost costing Nancy Pelosi, that's Nancy Stretchface Pelosi, but Nancy Pelosi her job. I was just talking about this. Republicans won majorities in at least 59 of the 98 partisan legislative chambers, and the Democrats failed to flip a single legislative chamber from red to blue. And in quote-unquote Mitch's Senate, over the last two election cycles, I single-handedly saved at least 12 Senate seats, more than 8 in the 2020 cycle alone. So there you go. And then came the Georgia disaster, which, in my opinion, Trump didn't help, where we should have won both U.S. Senate seats. True. But McConnell matched the Democrat offer of $2,000 stimulus checks with $600. I totally disagree with Trump in this whole situation here. How does that work? It became the Democrats' principal advertisement and a big winner for them. It was. He is right about that. It's a whole narrative, right? McConnell then put himself, one of the most unpopular politicians in the United States, into advertisements. That's a joke, right? Many Republicans in Georgia voted Democrat or just didn't vote because of their anguish at their inept governor, Brian Kemp, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and the Republican Party for not doing his job on election integrity. And the 2020 president, he's right. He's not wrong about that. I just don't think he helped that situation. It was a complete election disaster in Georgia and certain other swing states. McConnell did nothing, as they all did. I've been saying this for a while. And will never do what needs to be done in order to secure a fair and just electoral system in the future. Fact. He doesn't have what it takes, never did, never will. 100% agree with Trump on that. My only regret is that McConnell begged for my strong support and endorsement before the great people of Kentucky in the 2020 election, and I gave it to him. He went from 1 point down to 20 points up and won. How quickly he forgets. Without my endorsement, McConnell would have lost, and lost badly. Now his numbers are lower than ever before. He is destroying the Republican side of the Senate, and in doing so, seriously hurting our country. Now, what I will say, though, is Trump was supposed to come in and drain the swamp, right? Well, the fact that he caved in and, ended up supporting McConnell just shows that Trump's big problem was he just got behind some of the worst people. Like, he stuffed his cabinet full of swamp things. He supported them in elections like so. He didn't fire people. He hired the wrong people. He was credited so much with being a guy who hires the right people or whatever. Well, all he ever did was hire the wrong people and support the wrong people. Case in point. He goes on. Likewise, McConnell has no credibility on China because of his family's substantial Chinese business holdings. He does nothing on this tremendous economic and military threat. I totally agree, and this is what I mean by the moment I seen McConnell's face, I immediately knew, 15 years ago, the guy was full of corruption. And then especially when I learned about, who he was married to, it didn't help the situation. And what I mean by that was his wife was part of the Bush administration, which was extremely corrupt, was very nice to China, to put it that way. Going on. Mitch is a dour, sullen, and unsmiling political hack. And if Republican senators are going to stay with him, they will not win again. He will never do what needs to be done or what's right for our country. I totally agree with that. Where necessary and appropriate, I will back primary rivals who espouse making America great again and our policy of America first. We want brilliant, strong, thoughtful, and compassionate leadership. And then he goes on to give some highlights of what he did when he was in office. But overall, I do agree with this. It's very classic Trump. And I never liked the fact that he hosed it up to McConnell in the first place. I know he kind of did it out of necessity, and together they did pass a bunch of conservative judges through the Senate, but I don't know if it was worth it because the guy's total trash, total corruption, owned by China. Yeah, never was a fan. And he'll continue to be a loser, that's for sure, talking about McConnell. Talking about another loser I just want to mention real quick is the petty tyrant Gavin Newsom. I mean, this guy is probably another joke of jokes, head clown of the clown show. He is a political scam artist, that's for sure. Him and his wineries, which were allowed to stay open while everything else was locked down. It's complete hypocrisy when he was caught in a restaurant eating with a bunch of people, no mask on, and then he lied and said, well, it was outdoors, and the video came out, saw that it was indoors. And allegedly, he's losing popularity. I mean, this state's completely controlled. It's a completely one-party state, but apparently he's pissed off enough people that there's a recall Gavin Newsom petition going around, and it failed the first 2 times, but now it's looking like he might have, or there might be a chance. In my opinion, no matter what, this state, California, is a completely lost cause, and it has a supermajority Democrat in their state legislature, and then the other name floating around to run for governor is the former mayor of San Diego, who was a Republican, but he was a milquetoast, weak California, rhino Republican, and he'll be just, first of all, he'll lose, and second of all, if he did manage to win, he'd be trash, just like the rest of them. And California has some terrible gun control laws, and I lost faith with him the moment I heard him say, oh yeah, I totally support California's gun control laws. And then after that, it didn't even matter. If you can't stand up for basic human freedoms and civil liberties, and you have an R next to your name, that's even more sad. Like, I would expect it with a D next to your name, but when you have an R next to your name, that's even more sad. So, I don't vote here, but if I did, I definitely wouldn't vote for, I can't even think of his name. He's such trash to me, I can't even remember. But going back on Gavin Newsom, the tyrant dictator, I'm trying to find the story here, I had it up. But essentially and it's kind of funny because as the numbers and the petition numbers started raising and getting higher and higher, and I saw it was either a meme or a graphic or something where it showed that as the numbers rose, like the lockdown started to suddenly ease up as they hit certain points. Well, here's an article from Fox News. California okays mail ballots for 2021 as recall looms. California Governor Gavin Newsom prepares for a potential recall election this year. Supporters must have about 1.5 million signatures by March 17th to qualify for the ballot. Organizers say they already have collected more than that, but it's unclear how many of those signatures will be valid. Republicans, meanwhile, are pouring cash into the effort as the signature gathering deadline approaches. But my point is, if they're saying that they already have the signatures, and imagine a chunk of them be thrown out, but they still have a full month to continue gathering signatures. And like I said, I mean, if anything, this at least shows, governors, especially progressive, liberal, Democrat governors in one-party states, can still face these recall threats, given everything, right? Given the fact that they own the state lock, stock, and barrel, yet there's enough people here to still rise up and have their voices heard. Like, I don't know what the outcome. I mean, it's kind of exciting, but at the same time, I'm not expecting anything great to come out of it, other than it's like another huge middle finger to at least the establishment in California and really to the establishment period. So I back 100%. I don't know if the final outcome will be worth anything. The last time they did this, they got Arnold Schwarzenegger in office, and he was a total joke. If you actually looked at his policies, he was essentially a Democrat anyways, and the guy just was garbage as a governor. So, and he ran as a Republican, but he was trash. And because it was a celebrity, a lot of it went under the rug. But nice to see, and we'll see what happens. All right, so another thing I want to mention. Sorry, I know I have a lot of stories I want to talk about. And another one I want to talk about is very recently, Mr. Biden had a town hall, and it was very, very full of gaffes. And when you watch it, it just seems like the guy has no idea what's going on, really. But one thing he brought up, which I thought was pretty disgraceful, was he was asked a question regarding the internment camps, right? And that's putting it nicely. The internment camps going on in China where the Uyghur, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but the Uyghur Muslims, they're like a certain group of people in China. They have been, for a while now, being rounded up, and there's satellite images of this where it shows them, like, shoving them into trains. It's very reminiscent of this other event that happened maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, where they shove them in trains and they ship them off to these quote-unquote internment camps or these re-education centers because they're trying to, make China one culture. And so they're taking these Uyghur Muslims and putting them in trains, sending them to these camps, these work camps, internment camps, re-education, where they're learning how to be traditional Chinese citizens, I guess, right? And there's all kinds of stories from different people leaking, different reporters sneaking in and leaking stories of like mass rapes where they're holding women down, and they're also forcing abortions and stuff. And there's some of it's rumors, some of it is backed up with stories. I could sit here and start digging, but that's the overall gist of it. Some people use the word genocide, some people use the word gulag, but I know at least the bare minimum, there's definitely internment camps and re-education stuff going on, and the stories of mass rape and stuff like that, violations of basic human rights, and basically how we've been totally ignoring the whole situation. And then during this town hall, Biden is asked a question about it, and I encourage you to go and watch this. And it is mind-boggling. He essentially says that the leader of China, Jinping, whatever his name is, I can't remember his name, something like that, that how he has the right or whatever to rule over his people and represent his, I can't, it was some weird answer about how, basically justifying what he's doing in terms of the overall, how he's running his country and all being one people or whatever, and representing the people. And essentially he's doing the same thing here, right, where he's all about unity or whatever. It's something along that. But the whole thing is, he was given a chance to come out and speak out against this whole situation, and he completely sidestepped and tried to, and just a bumble. He sounded like a bumbling fool, but it also sounded like he knew what he was supposed to say, and he was catching himself. And I guess that's what's the most disgraceful part about it. So I encourage you guys to go watch that and see what I'm talking about if you haven't yet, because it's just, I don't know, it's not a bright spot in history for us. It's definitely, you use that term, coming down on the right side of history. I don't think that moment was coming down on the right side of history. And then also talking about kind of like the foreign policy situation is, there's a story from literally 24 hours after Biden took over where we sent like 200 U.S. troops to Syria, like the very next day. It's from a local news agency in Syria, or at least in that area of the world, the Kurd press. So then the Kurds have a huge presence over there, right? U.S. sends 200 troops and 40 trucks of equipment to Syria and Kurdistan. And this is literally the day, January 22nd, 2021. The Syrian State News Agency, SANA, reported that U.S. troops and military and logistical equipment had entered Syrian territory through the El Walid border gate from northern Iraq and were sent to the U.S. military base in Hasaka province. Brett McGurk, the former U.S. rep in the anti-ISIS coalition, who was against the U.S. withdrawal from Syria, is now the head of the country's security policy in the Middle East and North Africa. Given his background, McGurk is expected to increase the U.S. military presence in Syria and strengthen Kurdish forces. The military-industrial complex is back. Congratulations. You guys are back in action. The war machine is ready to go. So there you go. That was maybe not even full 24 hours after Biden took over. Now, I will say this, ending on some sort of good news, I guess. I want to end on more of a positive note, and I'm sure there's all kinds of political implications to this. I'm sure I could dig into this and find out all kinds of stuff, but I'll say even a clock is right twice a day, right? And you got to give credit where credit's due. I guess that's the saying I should stick with. Giving credit where credit's due. And one thing that Biden did do, a day or two ago, February 16th, there's a story from PBS. In foreign policy shift, Biden lifts terrorist designation for Houthis in Yemen. And I'll say, going back to Trump for a second, one reason he was so hated by the establishment and the global elites and the deep state and the intel community was that he did push back against the military-industrial complex. The problem is that those guys are so powerful that, or Trump didn't take the initiative. I mean, I don't know because we weren't there, but they were able still to pull off a lot, like the Syria thing. He was pulling out. There's a story where he ordered a drawdown in Syria, and the military commanders in Syria, whoever, lied to him and said that was happening when it wasn't. So that's one thing there. And then there's another situation in Somalia where, and I could go into this another time and go way deep into the whole Somalia situation, but Trump asked his defense secretary at the time, James Mattis, who I know a lot of people like, but I absolutely hate, but because he's a warmonger and he's a machine of the military-industrial complex, and it's just a total POS because of that, right? He's deep state. It's corruption all the way across. But anyways, Trump asked, why are we even in Somalia? Like, this is on record. He asked, why are we even in Somalia? Well, what's that have to do with us? And then Mattis gave him the good old, because they're not trying to have a 9/11, essentially. They're trying not to have another 9/11, which is the complete BS license to do whatever the hell the military-industrial complex wants to do, right? That's their excuse. That's their take-all excuse. So another part of that, and I don't know the details of how, what, or why, but I know, well, I should say I do know what was a whole controversy or not the controversy, but what I was just saying was the whole situation in Yemen and the Houthis, if I'm saying that right. But Trump expanded the drone war in Yemen, and I should pull the story up, but I have to look for it. But basically, he expanded the drone war like 1,000%, or some crazy number. Like, I was reading a story where Obama had like 154 drone strikes total, and I forget if it was a 4 or 8 year span, and Trump in a 2 year span in Yemen only did 174, 176 or something like that. So he absolutely expanded the war. And then, as I always recall, he was always buddying up to the Saudi dictators, right? Like, he was always being nice and friendly and cool with them. And I remember always hearing about, huge arms sales going to Saudi Arabia, because it was those weapons they're using to attack the Houthis. And I know that the U.S. was involved in helping targeting weapons and stuff like that. And so while Trump didn't start any new wars, and I give him credit for that, he did expand the war, knowingly or not, but he did. It was under his administration that he expanded the war, and that led to a huge crisis. So, I mean, UNICEF.org. Yemen is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, where more than 24 million people, some 80% of the population, in need of humanitarian assistance, including more than 12 million children. Since the conflict escalated in March 2015, the country has become a living hell for the country's children. And you could easily go online, and it's hard to watch, but you could see all kinds of starving, emaciated babies and kids, and it's really hard to watch. And then knowing that we have a hand in that, it just, I don't know, makes me feel sick. It's the same old military industrial complex BS that's always been the thing. And the Trump administration did label the Houthis as terrorists, which kept this war going. And so I must give credit where credit's due, where Biden reversed that. Again, I don't know if there's any underlying things going on or whatnot, but I have to give credit where credit's due. The Biden administration on Tuesday officially lifted the designation of the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen as a global terrorist organization. That announcement comes within a larger review of the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. Because I really have only one thing to say about Saudi Arabia, that's F Saudi Arabia. But the campaign have succeeded in transforming the Arab world's poorest country into a humanitarian catastrophe. The UN warns Yemen is in imminent danger of the worst famine in decades, and this year 2 million children under 5 will suffer from acute malnutrition. Last month, the Trump administration labeled the Houthis a global terrorist organization to try and cut off their funding and weapons, in part supplied by Iran, over the objections of humanitarians, including the World Food Bank director, David B. So, again, I don't know if there's any underlying things here. All I know is, as a freedom-loving, liberty-loving individual, as someone who really does believe in America first, I don't see any need for us to play in this geopolitics over in the Middle East and waste more money, treasure, and human beings on either side and partake in a situation, regardless of what's going on. Maybe the Houthis are a bunch of terrorists. Maybe they're a bad group of guys. But the Saudis aren't angels. That's their own regional BS. Let them fight them with their own weapons. Why are we giving them money and weapons and support and military support and helping cause this horrible situation that we shouldn't even be involved in at all? So if this is this is a step in that direction, then I give Biden credit if that's what's really going on. I must give credit where credit's due. And on my very, very last note, I just want to mention the sort of a scary situation. I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but the new defense secretary, about couple weeks ago, he issued orders for a 60-day stand down to confront extremism in the military. This is from Military Times. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has called on the services to conduct a 60-day stand down on the issue of extremism in the military, prompted by the January 6th attack on the Capitol and subsequent reports of both active duty and former service members attending a rally calling to overturn the 2020 election and the riot that ensued. Austin held a meeting of the service secretaries and Joint Chiefs, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby told reporters, to ask them about their concerns and ideas for improving the situation. Even though the numbers might be small, they may not be small as we would like them to be, or we believe them to be, Kirby said, of the prevalence of troops with extremist views, ties, or activities, and that no matter what it is not a significant problem. Guidance is forthcoming on what Austin expects to see after the 60 days. So, all I'm going to say about this is, of course, I would stand completely opposed to anybody in the military holding any kind of quote-unquote extremist views, which I assume what they're really trying to say, well, there's what they're trying to say and what they're really, really trying to say. What they're trying to say on the surface is, hey, no one with racist views, white supremacist views, etc., right? And of course, I stand against that. I would never support anybody, military not, that held racist views, white supremacist views, etc., etc. That's like what they're trying to say, but then there's what they're really trying to say. And what they're really trying to say is goes directly back to what I was saying earlier in the show, where I was talking about what happened at the Capitol, what's going on at the Capitol right now, which, by the way, before Biden's inauguration, they went and had the FBI, quote-unquote, investigate the National Guardsmen at the Capitol to make sure there weren't any, quote-unquote, extremists that were at the Capitol. And they actually removed troops by looking at their social media and other things, removed troops that had things like the Gadsden flag on their profile or whatever, right? So, essentially a loyalty test, which to me is very dangerous and un-American. And it's what I'm saying about the whole thing, what I was talking about, where you take a small group of people, like the QAnon conspiracy theorists or whatever, you say all Trump supporters are white supremacists, white nationalists, racists, and you smear all those people under that label. And you group them all together and you pigeonhole all those people, where if you merely have a conservative viewpoint, you say you want lower taxes or you support a border wall, now it's just linking one thing to the next. Like, oh, you support low taxes. Trump supporters support lower taxes. Trump supporters are racist and white supremacists that storm the Capitol because they believe in the QAnon experience, so therefore they're extremists. Therefore, if you held any of these type of views or support any of these type of people or support Trump in any way whatsoever, and you publicly said it or put it online, you are an extremist. So just like with everything else, with Bank of America and the social credit system, my fear is that that whole kind of mindset is being brought into the military. All right, because the military, that is, like, some will say, is one of the last institutions that, and I would disagree with this, but this is what people say, that it's one of the last institutions that the right kind of has, right? They have, like, the police and the military, essentially. Like, there's a lot of conservatives in police and military. And I don't even push back. I don't think that's the case, per se. I would think it's more of a microcosm of society overall. But that's what they try to say. So it's kind of like a loyalty test, kind of like the same kind of thing, just bringing it into the military, bringing it into the government, and it's the same kind of thing. So yes, of course I'm against, and that's the thing, is they're using quote-unquote extremist views. You know, they're not even saying racist, they're not even saying white supremacist, or nothing. It's extremist. That's a very vague term, given the context of today, right? So, again, of course, I'm against any kind of domestic terrorism, like actual domestic terrorism and actual white supremacists and actual racists. But my fear is it's define extremists. It's define domestic terrorists. Define all these things. Because, like I said before, they call everybody a Nazi, and then they change the definition and they expand the definition of Nazi. And that's what I'm afraid of. Maybe it'll end up being nothing, but given everything else, in the context of everything else, it just seems another huge step in the wrong direction. And with that being said, I have a few more stories I could talk about, but I've been talking for a while here. So I do want to end the show on paying my respects to Rush Limbaugh one more time. May he rest in peace. And everybody out there, please have a good day or good night. And you have been listening to Aaron Burr on the Aaron Burr broadcast of the Free Thought Doctrine.